In the murky streets of Victorian England, where the skies were perpetually coated in coal smoke and the air reeked of industrial grime, personal cleanliness was far from a luxury, it was a matter of survival. The era's relationship with hygiene reflected the stark social divisions, where the wealthy lived in opulence, while the working class faced squalid conditions that made even the most basic acts of cleanliness a rare privilege. Charles Dickens' vivid portrayal of the filth of London's East End contrasts sharply with the pristine cleanliness of the West. And the Victorian era saw an emerging obsession with hygiene, but not all classes shared in this new standard. The working class lived in overcrowded tenements, where running water was a luxury few could afford. For those who did have access to water, bathing became a weekly ritual. The Saturday night bath, though a family affair, was a sad spectacle, with family members sharing the same water, beginning with the father and ending with the youngest child. By the time the baby was bathed, the water was so murky that one could barely distinguish it. Public bathhouses, which began to appear in the 1840s, provided some relief. These were rudimentary, offering cold baths for a penny and hot baths for twopence. The Victoria Baths in Manchester, opened in 1906, exemplified the grandeur these institutions could achieve. Not only were these public baths places to clean the body, but they also served as social hubs for the community. The wealthy enjoyed the privilege of more elaborate bathing practices, which contrasted starkly with the situation for the poor. Those who could afford the luxury of a private bathroom had servants to carry hot water to their copper baths. Queen Victoria herself set an example, installing an elaborate marble bathroom at Windsor Castle in 1850, complete with one of the first shower mechanisms in Britain. During this time, the soap industry also saw remarkable transformations. Early Victorian soaps were crude, often made from animal fat and lye, which could be harsh on the skin, however. Entrepreneurs like Andrew Pears revolutionized the market in the 1860s with transparent soap, which was gentler on the skin. Pears soap became iconic, advertising its benefits with cherubic children and glamorous women. It wasn't long before celebrity endorsements entered the mix, with actress Lily Langtry becoming the first to endorse a product in 1789. Meanwhile, for those who couldn't afford such luxuries, homemade alternatives like vinegar rinses and oatmeal scrubs became standard fare. Recipes for homemade soap made from rendered fat and caustic soda were popular, though the process could be hazardous, sometimes resulting in burns. Clothing cleanliness became an even more visible marker of social status during the Victorian era. As fashion became increasingly elaborate, the ability to maintain clean and well-maintained clothing distinguished the upper and middle classes from the working poor. For men, detachable collars and cuffs were an ingenious invention that allowed them to maintain an outward appearance of respectability despite the lack of running water or private washrooms. These collars and cuffs could be removed and washed separately, making it easier for even modest clerks and laborers to present themselves as well-groomed, as the image of cleanliness was deeply tied to respectability. Women's fashion was no less extravagant. Elaborate dresses, often weighing up to 14 pounds, were frequently worn by the wealthy, but rarely washed in their entirety. Instead, women used undergarments to absorb body oils and sweat, which were changed and washed more frequently, while the outer garments were spot-cleaned and aired. Women of the upper classes, especially those who followed the fashion trends closely, relied on specialist laundries to ensure their elaborate gowns, intricate lace, and delicate fabrics were preserved. The famous fashion magazine Godey's Lady S book even advised in 1859 that a good silk dress should last 20 years or more if cared for properly. This care involved protecting the fabric from direct exposure to dirt and sweat by using undergarments that absorbed much of the bodily oils. As these societal norms evolved, so did the language. The phrase airing one's dirty laundry, originating from this period, was used both literally, referring to the practice of hanging clothes to air, and metaphorically to describe revealing private matters publicly. The phrase encapsulates both the literal cleanliness of the era's clothing practices and the cultural expectations of maintaining one's reputation through visible cleanliness. Victorian society's focus on outward appearances, especially in terms of clothing, was not limited to just the wealthy. Even middle-class men and women had to navigate the pressures of cleanliness to conform to society's standards. This societal pressure to maintain a pristine appearance led to the rise of laundries, professional dry cleaning services, and new innovations like the detachable collar, which democratized cleanliness, making it attainable for all. While hygiene innovations flourished, some aspects of Victorian life remained grim and unsanitary, especially in hospitals and maternity wards. Medical practices in the mid-19th century would horrify modern doctors. Surgeons, unwashed and often wearing blood-soaked aprons as badges of honor, frequently moved from patient to patient without sterilizing their instruments. In hospitals like St. Bartholomew's, bloodied surgical coats and unclean tools were commonplace. The unintentional spread of infection was rampant, with death rates in some hospitals as high as 80% due to postoperative infections. Dr. Robert Liston, a Scottish surgeon famous for performing the fastest amputation on record, often held his blood-soaked knife between his teeth during surgeries. The situation in maternity wards was similarly dire. At Vienna General Hospital, the mortality rate for mothers during childbirth was an astonishing 18%, primarily due to puerperal fever, a deadly infection caused by poor hygiene. Dr. Ignaz Semmelweis, a Hungarian obstetrician, noticed that the mortality rate was drastically lower in the midwife-run second clinic compared to the doctor-led first clinic. He hypothesized that physicians should wash their hands between autopsies and childbirth, a revolutionary idea that he struggled to convince his peers to accept. Despite Semmelweis' groundbreaking discovery, the medical establishment rejected his ideas, and he tragically died in 1865 in an asylum, his findings ridiculed by the medical community. It wasn't until Louis Pasteur's work on germ theory and the introduction of antiseptic practices that the connection between bacteria and infection became widely accepted. Pasteur's work, which proved that microorganisms cause disease, revolutionized not only surgery, but also public health. Similarly, Florence Nightingale, a pioneering nurse during the Crimean War, used statistical analysis to demonstrate the connection between unsanitary conditions and high mortality rates among soldiers. She helped bring cleanliness and hygiene into the hospital system, reducing death rates dramatically. Nightingale's notes on nursing emphasized hygiene as a cornerstone of healthcare, influencing the future development of modern medical practices. These changes laid the foundation for the hygiene revolution, moving from an era where disease was spread by miasma to one where cleanliness, antiseptics, and proper waste disposal became essential in the fight against disease. The reforms made in the Victorian era, from improved hospitals to better hygiene practices, changed the landscape of public health forever. As the Industrial Revolution swept through Victorian England, bringing with it the promise of modernity, hygiene reform became a cornerstone of urban transformation. Public health concerns, particularly after devastating outbreaks of cholera and the continuing squalor in industrial cities, prompted a series of public health reforms that were essential in shaping the era's view on cleanliness. Before the mid-19th century, towns and cities had minimal infrastructure dedicated to hygiene, relying on rudimentary systems of waste management that were often overwhelmed by rapid population growth. The Great Stink of 1858 was a turning point in London's history. As temperatures rose, the Thames River became a fetid, polluted cesspool that reeked of human waste and industrial runoff, poisoning the air and water alike. The stench grew so unbearable that the British Parliament had to close its windows and use disinfectant to mask the smell. This crisis led to an urgent demand for a systematic overhaul of the city's sanitation infrastructure. The famous civil engineer Joseph Bazalgette was commissioned to create a comprehensive sewage system, which would help prevent the spread of waterborne diseases like cholera. His innovative design incorporated over 80 miles of sewers that carried waste away from the city and into the Thames, marking the beginning of modern urban sanitation. Bazalgette's revolutionary work in London not only solved a health crisis, but also paved the way for other cities in Europe to adopt similar practices. His creation of the Victoria Embankment, which combined sewage infrastructure with public space and new roads, became a symbol of the period's commitment to improving public health through engineering. The success of Bazalgette's work directly impacted the improvement of the overall quality of life for London's citizens and provided a model for other burgeoning metropolises grappling with overcrowded living conditions. With a focus on sanitary engineering and proper waste disposal, the Victorian era began to embrace the idea that cities could, in fact, be organized in a manner that prioritized health. However, this transformation did not happen overnight. Public resistance, particularly from wealthy elites who had traditionally relied on private sanitation, slowed the pace of reform. It took decades for the general public to understand the link between sanitation and public health, and it wasn't until the 20th century that hygiene reforms were fully embraced in most parts of the world. The divide between the working and upper classes in Victorian England was starkly reflected in their access to hygiene. The wealthier classes enjoyed the privilege of private bathrooms, marble wash basins, and attendants who would bring heated water for their baths, as seen in the royal household's elaborate installations. Queen Victoria's own private bathroom at Windsor Castle, installed in 1850, set a royal example of opulence, complete with one of the first shower systems in Britain, where water poured down from a chain-pulled mechanism. The upper class was not only able to afford the best hygiene products, including luxurious soaps like pears and macassar oil, but also had the leisure to maintain their personal cleanliness through regular baths and skin treatments. In contrast, the working class had to make do with whatever resources they could find. Access to bathing facilities was minimal, with many families living in overcrowded tenements sharing one cold water tap. Public bathhouses, while offering some relief, were few and far between, often limited to larger cities like London and Manchester. These bathhouses, such as the Victoria Baths in Manchester, were not only places to clean, but also became social hubs where people from all walks of life interacted, creating a sense of community. For the working poor, taking a bath was more of a weekly event than a daily ritual, with entire families sharing the same murky bathwater in a process that became a grim symbol of economic hardship. Additionally, washing clothes was a tedious task that required either the use of public laundromats or the old-fashioned method of boiling laundry at home. In the wealthier households, washing machines and other innovations began to ease the burden of daily labor, but the working-class families relied on handmade soap and time-consuming processes to clean their garments. This significant disparity in hygiene access was not only a reflection of class, but also a tool that reinforced the societal hierarchy. The Victorian obsession with cleanliness became a way to demonstrate one's social standing, with the wealthy clearly setting themselves apart from the lower classes. The connection between cleanliness and moral character became deeply ingrained in the period's social discourse, with the well-to-do often viewing the unkempt as morally and socially inferior. The transformation of personal hygiene during the Victorian era left an indelible mark on future generations. The century saw a shift in how cleanliness was perceived from a luxury enjoyed by the wealthy to a right that was eventually accessible to the general population. This change was driven by a combination of public health initiatives, technological advances, and shifts in social attitudes. The rise of public health advocacy, spearheaded by figures like Florence Nightingale and Edwin Chadwick, helped bring attention to the importance of hygiene in preventing the spread of disease. As Nightingale famously said, "The very first requirement in a hospital is that it should do the sick no harm," advocating for sanitation measures that would lay the foundation for modern healthcare practices. The Victorian era also ushered in an era of modern consumer products. The introduction of mass-produced soaps, shampoos, and hygiene products helped make cleanliness a routine part of daily life for many. With the reduction of the soap tax and the introduction of new products like Sunlight soap, cleanliness became increasingly affordable. By the late 19th century, products like Pears soap, Rowland's Macassar oil, and various powders became household staples, making it easier for families to maintain personal cleanliness. This period also marked the beginning of personal care industries that would continue to grow in the 20th century. Yet the evolution of personal hygiene during the Victorian era was not only a revolution of public health, it was also a revolution in the way people understood their own bodies. The societal shifts in hygiene practices were deeply intertwined with moral considerations. And the growing focus on personal cleanliness was as much about preserving public morality as it was about preventing disease. Hygiene became a reflection of one's moral standing, and the widespread belief that cleanliness is next to godliness fueled these changes. As we move into the 21st century, the legacy of the Victorian hygiene revolution remains evident. Today, personal hygiene products are an integral part of daily life, with advancements in dermatology, medicine, and sanitation. Public health measures and engineering feats that were pioneered in the Victorian era continue to shape the way we approach sanitation in urban spaces, from water treatment plants to the design of modern hospitals. The Victorian obsession with cleanliness not only transformed the physical appearance of society, but also its moral compass. As Charles Dickens noted, the squalid conditions of London's East End were in sharp contrast to the pristine appearances maintained in the fashionable West End. This dichotomy between the rich and the poor, the clean and the dirty, laid the foundation for the modern understanding of hygiene as both a social and personal responsibility, one that continues to influence our relationship with cleanliness and health today.